President-elect Donald Trump's team continues to take shape. What do the picks tell us about the Trump agenda? Congressman Sean Duffy is here with his take. And terror returned to the U.S. this week in Ohio. Counterterrorism expert and author of Defeating Jihad, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, will analyze. And finally, chances are the kid in your life has read his Diary of a Wimpy Kid series. Here to talk about the latest book and reveal secrets behind the Wimpy Kid is best-selling author Jeff Kinney. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Congressman Sean Duffy, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, and Jeff Kinney are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout. You can find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email me at worldover@ewtn.com. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. President-elect Donald Trump kicked off a thank you tour on Thursday with stops in Indiana and Ohio. At the appearance in Indianapolis, Trump saluted the workers of the heating and air manufacturer Carrier. Earlier in the week, Trump struck a deal with the company to keep about 1,000 jobs at the plant. Earlier this year, Carrier announced that the plant would be closed and its jobs shipped to Mexico. Throughout his campaign, the Republican businessman repeatedly pledged to save that factory and ones like it as part of his plan to rebuild the American manufacturing industry. He issued a warning to other companies considering moving jobs offshore.
Thank you, everybody. Companies are not going to leave the United States anymore without consequences. Not going to happen. So one of the things we're doing to keep them is we're going to be lowering our business tax from 35%, hopefully down to 15%, which would take us from the highest tax nation virtually in the world. This is terrible for business.
Meanwhile, the president-elect's cabinet continues to take shape. On Monday, Trump nominated orthopedic surgeon and top Obamacare critic, Congressman Tom Price for Secretary of Health and Human Services. The Georgia Republican who chairs the House Budget Committee has drafted legislation to replace Obamacare and offered proposals to reform both Medicare and Medicaid. And on Thursday, it was announced that Donald Trump intends to nominate retired Marine General James Mattis to be Secretary of Defense. To take the job, Mattis will need Congress to pass new legislation to bypass a federal law, stating that defense secretaries must not have been on active duty in the previous 7 years. Congress has done that just once when General George C. Marshall was appointed to the post in 1950. Mattis left the Marines in 2013. An announcement is likely by early next week, according to people familiar with the choice. And just before the Thanksgiving holiday, Trump announced his education secretary, Betsy DeVos. The billionaire philanthropist and school choice advocate pledged to oversee a transformational change in U.S. education. Trump went further, saying that DeVos will break the bureaucracy that is holding our children back so that we can deliver world-class education and school choice to all families, end quote. More on these and other Trump cabinet picks with Congressman Sean Duffy later in the show. And in the wake of the death of Cuban dictator Fidel Castro, President-elect Trump has threatened to undo President Barack Obama's push to normalize relations with the communist nation. Taking to Twitter, Trump wrote, "If Cuba is unwilling to make a better deal for the Cuban people, the Cuban American people, and the U.S. as a whole, I will terminate the deal." Incoming Chief of Staff Reince Priebus told Fox News that among the changes Trump would demand are open markets, freedom of religion, and the freeing of political prisoners in Cuba. Back on Capitol Hill, Congressman Nancy Pelosi beat back a challenge on Wednesday to maintain her leadership reign as House Minority Leader. Pelosi beat 43-year-old Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio, 134 votes to 63. It was the smallest margin of victory for a House Party leader since at least the 1990s. Pelosi, a professed Roman Catholic and a staunch defender of abortion rights, has led the House Democrats since 2003. And over 70 presidents of Catholic institutions of higher learning signed a public statement supporting undocumented students. Issued by the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities, the statement calls for protection of so-called dreamers who were brought to the U.S. illegally by their parents. Specifically, they're calling for a continuation of DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. This was instituted by President Obama in 2012. DACA shields deportation for 2-year periods for those illegal immigrants who arrived in the U.S. before their 16th birthday. Over 720,000 of these students have been approved under DACA. President-elect Donald Trump has said on numerous occasions that he would end such programs and clamp down on illegal immigration. Among the signers of the statement are presidents of Villanova University, Boston College, and the Catholic University of America. And in the tradition of Brexit and the election of Donald Trump, a free market conservative has won in France's presidential primary this week. Former Prime Minister François Fillon took the center-right primary by a landslide, making him the leading candidate to challenge far-right Marine Le Pen in France's presidential election this spring. Fillon, who is a practicing Roman Catholic and father of 5, easily defeated his challenger with 68% of the vote. Fillon's platform? Slashing government spending and getting immigration under control. Sound familiar? Meanwhile, current French President François Hollande announced Thursday that he would not seek re-election in light of his single-digit approval ratings. No other left-of-center presidential candidate is expected to seriously challenge Fillon or Le Pen. And Pope Francis confirmed this week that he may make the first papal trip to Ireland in nearly 40 years. He could also be making an historic visit to Northern Ireland. The Pope confirmed his 2018 Irish visit during a Vatican meeting with the Prime Minister of Ireland, Jeff Kinney. The late Pope John Paul II visited Ireland in 1979, but he could not go north because of sectarian violence there between Protestant loyalists and Catholic nationalists. The Democratic Unionist Party leader said she would be willing to meet with the Pope as a head of state if he travels to Northern Ireland. But she said in a statement that the invitation must come from the British Foreign Office. Free Presbyterian ministers have said they will protest a papal visit to the north. In the Republic, Francis will be facing an Irish church with declining numbers and disillusionment following revelations of widespread abuse carried out in some of its institutions. And the letter issued by 4 cardinals asking Pope Francis to clarify his teaching in the apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia continued to make waves. This week, Archbishop Pio Vito Pinto, the dean of the Roman Rota, the Church's highest canonical court, says the 4 cardinals could lose their cardinal titles for causing what he called grave scandal by making their letter public. As we recently reported, Cardinal Raymond Burke and 3 other high-ranking prelates wrote Pope Francis months ago asking for clarification on certain points of doctrine addressed in the Pope's exhortation on marriage and the family. Francis declined to issue an answer. Archbishop Pio Vito says Pope Francis did respond indirectly to the cardinals in an interview with an Italian newspaper when he lamented that some in the church only see black and white when there are shades of color, and therefore it was an act of disloyalty by Burke and the others to make their challenge public. We'll keep you posted on any other further developments in this story. And Cardinal Joseph Zen, Bishop Emeritus of Hong Kong, is again condemning a potential deal between the Vatican and Beijing. This would include allowing the communist government to screen potential bishop appointments. The senior Chinese prelate called such a deal a betraying of Jesus Christ. He said any agreement where Beijing would have a hand in approving clergy would be a surrender. Cardinal Joseph Zen opined that maybe the Pope is a little naive. He doesn't have the background to know the communists in China, the persecutors who have killed hundreds of thousands, end quote. Currently, Chinese Catholics are free to go to approved masses and attend government-sanctioned churches, but they're barred from proselytizing. The state-run Catholic Patriotic Association controls the church and appoints bishops currently without any input from the Vatican. And finally, it was a busy and star-studded first week of Advent for Pope Francis at the Vatican. During his Sunday Angelus address, he reminded the faithful that Advent is an invitation to open our horizons to more than worldly and material concerns. He warned that if we are instead dominated and overpowered by them, it's not possible to perceive that which is much more important, our final encounter with the Lord. The following day, the Holy Father received famed cosmologist and professed atheist Stephen Hawking. A sitting member of the Pontifical Academy for Science, Hawking discussed with the Pope the origin of the universe. And on Wednesday, the Pope met with Hollywood director Martin Scorsese, who screened his new film about 17th century martyrs. It's called Silence. All the while, the Pope has maintained his silence on the dubia from those four cardinals. And finally, the holiday season is upon us. They lit the Christmas tree in Washington, D.C. and at Rockefeller Center in New York. And my new special and CD, Christmas Time in New Orleans, is available now everywhere through the EWTN Religious Catalog, online at iTunes, and at Amazon.com. You can catch the PBS special on your local public television station now through the new year. Christmas Time in New Orleans will air in Kansas City, San Antonio, Dayton, Omaha, Jackson, Lincoln, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, Baton Rouge, Birmingham, Las Vegas. It's really airing across the country over the next few days and other places. Go to RaymondArroyo.com. I have a link to the air times in your market, and don't miss the special on PBS. When we return, President-elect Donald Trump is assembling his team. What are we to make of his personnel choices? And how might they tell us about his coming administration? Congressman Sean Duffy will unpack it all for us when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. President-elect Donald Trump filled key positions in his new administration this week, and there are more to come. What will be at the top of his post-inaugural agenda? And what about that Wisconsin recount? Here to help us make sense of it all is a member of the House Financial Services Committee, Congressman of Wisconsin's 7th District, Congressman Sean Duffy.
Raymond, good to see you.
Great
Thanks
to see
for having me on.
Let's jump right in.
Yeah.
Donald Trump promised he would keep manufacturing jobs in the United States, and with calls, phone calls, to Ford Motor Company a few weeks ago, and now Carrier, he saved 1,000 jobs at Carrier and several hundred at Ford, maybe 1,000, many 1,000 at Ford. Here's the question. Won't this encourage other businesses to threaten to move offshore until they get a better tax deal?
So first of all, we got to realize he's not even president yet.
Right.
He's the president-elect. And in my district in Wisconsin, I was one of the reasons why Trump won Wisconsin. I mean, my district was, my part of Wisconsin, is because people want a president who's going to fight for them and fight for their jobs. So even right now, Raymond, back in Wisconsin, there's people who didn't vote for Mr. Trump. Mm-hmm. But they're watching what he's doing for those employees at Carriers, those families, those 1,000 families who now are going to go into this Christmas and have job security. They're going, maybe there's something special about Mr. Trump. Finally, I got a guy who will fight for me. And I think that's important.
But the way he got the deal was by saying, look, we're going to give you some tax breaks here. We're going to find a package. Doesn't that fall to Congress to actuate that?
So we don't know the specifics of the deal, really. That's going to come out. But he can't unilaterally offer tax breaks. I think there's a little foreshadowing that we are going to do tax reform in the House. Mm-hmm. He's game for it. But also, Carrier and its parent company they do a lot of work with the federal government. And so you have a lot of leverage over them to say, listen, you want to do business with the American government? Let's talk about these jobs in Indiana. But again, you can't underestimate a guy who's willing to fight for families and for jobs, and finally we have a guy who's going to do it in Donald
Now, tell
Trump.
me about these victory tours. The president is today in Ohio. He's going to tour the country, particularly some of these swing states. I imagine your state, Wisconsin, could be in the offing, Michigan. Your thoughts on how smart this is politically?
Well, if I didn't even think it was smart, Raymond, I wouldn't say it because I've been wrong through this whole campaign. I think it's smart, though, to go back to the Rust Belt, go back to North Carolina and Florida and say, you know what? Thank you all for standing with me. Thanks for giving me a chance to stand with you and fight for you. I think he's going to have huge rallies. And you're going to see him once again have this great connection with the American people. So I hope he's going to come to Wisconsin. And if he does, I think you're going to see throngs of people come out. And again, it won't just be those who voted for him. I think you're going to see some naysayers maybe come to the rally and say, what's so special about Donald Trump? I want to hear him.
No, I think it's a great move, too. It's important to show also at the beginning of the administration, look, this isn't about me, it's really about you. And I want to bring this message back to you and let you know I'm still fighting for you.
And, I'm humble enough to say thank you and take the time.
Exactly. Now, I imagine if he ends up in Wisconsin, he will drop in on the entire Duffy family. Are you doing the Jill Stein recount? The whole lot of you. I mean, you do this while you make Christmas presents, and it's like Santa's workshop over there at the Duffy house.
Listen, you just take those Catholic families together. We have 8 kids. My wife and I will have 20 hands.
There you go. It's like Santa's workshop, looking at the hanging chads.
That's right.
Well, they're not doing a hand count, though. Let's get serious. Jill Stein wanted a recount. She's getting a recount. It started in Wisconsin. What's going to happen here?
So the counties get to decide. So most of the counties are going to use their electronic machines, which are, by the way, not connected to the internet. They're plugged in for electricity. They can't be hacked. They're accurate. There's no issue with this vote. But
there's also no way to check them. I mean, you don't have paper ballots to check them against.
No, we do.
Oh, you do?
So if I can just take your paper, we have a ballot. We fill in the ovals and put it through the reader.
Oh, okay.
So we have all the ballots.
Read the ballots. Okay.
But there are some counties that lean a little bit left that will actually hand count them to take up more time. So I look at this and I wonder, why does Hillary Clinton want to join Jill Stein and contest Wisconsin when she made such a big stink about Donald Trump, saying, I might not accept the results of this election? I think we should accept that Donald Trump is the victor, understand that they can't make up the 22,000 votes in Wisconsin by which Donald Trump won, and let's move forward. Accept that he won the race, and let's start working together to build the economy and build opportunity for people.
So who do you think's driving this? Who's behind this? Is this a Clinton campaign? Is this George Soros? Who's driving this Jill Stein effort?
Well, if you look at the funding, it's being funded by the traditional Democrat Hillary Clinton donors. Jill Stein only raised $3.5 million in her campaign. She's doubled that for this recount. So she's raised more money for the recount than she did for her whole presidential campaign. The left is funding it. And I think what they want to do, Raymond, is they want to put a stain on Donald Trump's presidency with every chance they can, and to deny him or try to deny him the Wisconsin electors, to try to say this is illegitimate is what they're trying to do. And just think back for a second. Scott Walker had recalls in Wisconsin, and he won. And he won with more votes than he got in the initial election, because in Wisconsin, we like fair play. We don't like people playing games like this. And I'm hearing even Democrats say, listen, the guy won. Why are we playing games with a recount? And what this does, it'll drive more Democrats away from the party and give Donald Trump and Republicans, which I am, a chance to bring them with us because we're fair, honest players.
Let's get back to Capitol Hill and the agenda that it appears, according to Mike Pence, the vice presidential-elect, that Obamacare is going to be the first item on the agenda here. What form will that take? I'm reading in some places they may repeal a bit of it. Donald Trump is already on record saying, no, we're going to have a simultaneous repeal and replace. Is that possible in this climate?
So I don't think there's clarity yet, except for the fact that we are going to fix health care. And the current health care plan, which Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, which isn't affordable, it doesn't work. And so do you try to fix the lemon that you bought, or do you cash in the lemon and get a new car? Let's get a new car. Now, there's some tenets of the Affordable Care Act, like allowing kids to stay on coverage, whether it's till 23 or 25.
And
we'll talk about that in
conditions, which Trump likes.
Either there'll be a repeal and replace, but I think that's tougher. I think what we'll do is we'll set a date for repeal. and then that'll give us time to work with Democrats because we're going to need Democrat buy-in, Raymond. We only have 52 Republicans in the Senate. You need 60 Democrats to pass a comprehensive package.
Right.
We got to give them time to buy in. So let's repeal it. We'll have time to get buy-in from them for the replacement and start helping families again. There's too many families across the country that are having substantial increases in premiums and in deductibles, and they're being priced out of health care. We got to fix it for them.
Donald Trump named Tom Price, congressman, as his Health and Human Services Secretary. How will that help? Now, Price had his own plan for a long time. It's been on the table. Hasn't gotten much traction, but I would imagine it wouldn't.
Well, because we can't
Yeah, you can't move it.
Barack Obama to help us
yeah.
pass it. Right. So Tom Price, really smart guy. He chairs the Budget Committee. He's a doctor. He knows healthcare front and back. And so to pluck that kind of knowledge out of the House and put him at Health and Human Services, I think is a brilliant move by the president, because he knows policy and he knows the House, and he'll be able to manage both of those for Donald Trump.
He's a pro-life guy as well, on the record saying that, pro-life, it's important to protect all lives, including the unborn. What do you think that portends for that HHS mandate that's a part of Obamacare? That was a big issue during the election. I know it's very important to our viewers. You'd say what about that?
Well, listen, the mandate's gone. We have a lot of people in the House, and from what I've heard from the president, he believes in religious liberty. He believes in allowing us the ability to practice our faith the way we see fit. So you will not see that mandate in there. I can guarantee you that. And not only that, Raymond, I look at the money that flows to Planned Parenthood, federal taxpayer money, that they'll say isn't used for abortions, but we know this money is fungible. And the movement inside the House to make sure we take that money away from Planned Parenthood. If Planned Parenthood wants to stop doing abortions, they can access money for the providing of women's health. And we're going to put more money, I think, into women's health. But we're going to, I think, provide money to those organizations that don't provide abortions. And that's a rallying cry, which is going to be a huge fight for us. But it's a rallying cry within the Congress right now. And I think, based on what Donald Trump said in the campaign and in the debates, he's going to go along with us on this.
I want to talk about one other two other appointments here. Betsy DeVos as Education Secretary. She has been a fierce advocate and literally has put her money where her mouth is on vouchers, on charter schools. What does that portend for the federal government?
It means that
and the public schools?
That we have someone in education that understands that when you have a failing school, you need to give a lifeline to these kids and these families, and you can do it through vouchers or charter schools. And right now, we're in a system where if you don't have the right zip code, you don't have the right school, you don't have a pathway to the American dream. And what Betsy's going to talk about is how do we make sure we incent competition within those failing schools to give kids a lifeline up for the American dream and for opportunity, and that only comes through education. She hasn't sold out to anybody. She's going to fight for kids, not unions, not teachers. But kids come first, and that's what we need in that position. And I think she'll be a brilliant wire for American children.
Okay, what about this State Department pick?
I don't know.
We have been seeing this looks like an episode of The Bachelor that keeps going on. And we've had dinner dates.
Who's going to get the rose?
Yeah, who gets the rose? They had the dinner dates. They walked up to the tower. They've all been on walks together.
I know.
This one had a long phone call. Here comes Rudy. Rudy's not there anymore. Now Mitt he won. It's
walked
wonderful.
to the elevator for the rose ceremony.
What is happening? Is that the best optics for this choice? Or should this have been handled off the scene in the Washington transition office, quietly, away from public scrutiny, and then you just come out and say, here's my guy?
No, listen, I think it's okay for the public to see the candidates that Donald Trump is considering. And yes, it might be a little reality TV-esque where you're being paraded through the cameras in the Trump Tower. We're seeing dinners with this odd light shining down onto the table and frog legs. And I think it's okay. We want to be part of the process. Maybe our government is a little bit of reality TV in the sense that we want to see how these picks are happening. We get to see a little bit of the thought process of Donald Trump, and in the end, I think he's made really good picks so far. He's going to pick the right person to lead the State Department, and Yeah, we'll see. But I'm not offended by what he's doing. I think it's kind of a fascinating change-up in how you're picking your cabinet.
Well, it's and that picture is really funny, which we put up a second ago. But that picture of the two of them at dinner, it looks, Daddy, should I smile now? He looks middle of mid-brown. He looks so uncomfortable.
And then poor Reince Priebus is sitting there on the sideline.
Reince, yeah, he doesn't know whether to grab the frog legs or finish the garlic soup. But
he can't get a glass of wine, so he's
that's right. No wine. It's only water. Right. Well, at least that they agree on. No wine, no coffee.
That's right.
That's pretty good.
Well, but Reince doesn't, so he's stuck with no wine and no coffee.
He went to Starbucks on the way out.
I'm sure he did.
Final question. Speaking of Starbucks and on the way out, Cuba, Castro died in Cuba. We have American investment already moving in. Donald Trump tweeted out he's going to make a new deal with the Cuban government, and if they don't give us some concessions, he's going to shut down relations, essentially. Won't that hurt the American businesses that have already invested? They're already there.
I think his viewpoint is, how do I help the Cuban people? How do I, if I'm going to have a deal with Cuba, how do I guarantee religious liberty and economic liberty and freedom and political freedom, which they don't have now on the island? Barack Obama cut a deal with Cuba that continues the oppressive government that has been there for 50 years. Yeah. Donald Trump says, I'm not going to accept that. Every human spirit deserves an opportunity to practice their faith the way they see fit. They deserve political and economic freedom. And unless I can guarantee some of these concessions, the deal's off. And yes, some businesses might lose a little bit of money. But you know what? When you're fighting for people and their freedom, I think it's worth it to have that fight.
Do you find it curious that the Obama administration wanted to invest in beachfront realty in Cuba when we have our own problems over in Puerto Rico?
So Puerto Rico is an American territory. It's a beautiful island. And they're going through economic
meltdown.
Yeah. You open up Cuba, and all the tourists that were going to go to Puerto Rico and bring hard dollars in there are now going to Cuba. You're underselling your American citizens on the island, which is frankly a shame. Yeah. Let's fight for our American citizens in Puerto Rico, as opposed to bringing in competition from Cuba. Now, that's a side argument.
No, but it's an important one, because 52% of every dollar you drop in Cuba ends up in Raul Castro's pocket.
If not more. That's right. You're funding the regime.
Yeah, there's no free enterprise there, so we should just say that. Congressman Duffy, thank you for being here. We shall be in touch with you in the days ahead. When we return, what might have inspired the young Muslim immigrant in Ohio to go on that violent rampage this week, and how can radical Islamic extremism be countered? Dr. Sebastian Gorka will tell us when the world over returns. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. This week's knife attack at Ohio State University has brought the specter of terrorism back to the U.S. homeland. An 18-year-old perpetrator was a Somali immigrant who appears to have been angry about the treatment of Muslims around the world. Were there signs that this young man could be dangerous prior to his rampage, and what to do now? My next guest is an internationally known expert on national security and counterterrorism, and author of the book, Defeating Jihad, The Winnable War. Please welcome back to the program, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Doctore, great to see you again.
Grazie.
I want to start with just who this guy is, this Artan. He was a Somali immigrant, lived in Pakistan for a while, then he was in Dallas. They figured that out by pulling Catholic Charities records on him. Apparently he was settled by Catholic Refugee and Migration Services. What do we know about this guy, and how did he get in?
Okay, so what we know about this individual now after the fact is that on social media and also in the college newspaper, he wrote about the oppression of Muslims around the world, America's maltreatment, the wars, the global wars, and also how he felt oppressed or in danger if he prayed in public, and there was nowhere for him to pray on campus. So that's the only evidence we have right now. But as you said, very telling, not only do we have 50,000 Somalis who have been settled as refugees in the United States under the Obama administration. This individual also came through Pakistan, which is exactly what happened with, of course, the San Bernardino wife. So we have patterns of life, we have connections with other countries where there are such things as madrasas, and this is an issue.
Donald Trump, the president-elect, tweeted this out. He said ISIS is taking credit for the terrible stabbing attack at Ohio State University by a Somali refugee who should not have been in our country. Now, you're a consultant or were to the president-elect. Here's my question. The guy came in when he was 11 years old. He was a child. How do you vet? The president-elect has suggested extreme vetting should take place. What would that look like?
All right. So this is an issue that's very personal to me. I'm a Christian. My father was a Catholic, so we're not Muslims, but they were refugees, and they were vetted. They went through extreme vetting when they escaped communist Hungary. What does that look like? It looks like interrogation, interviews, proving that your value system comports with the value system of the nation that you wish to live in as a refugee and perhaps a citizen. That's what Donald Trump means by extreme vetting. And also, we have to remember that here there are places in the world, and the director of the FBI has admitted this, where you cannot do effective screening of individuals because there's no data against which to compare them.
No paperwork.
No paperwork and no databases. Like if you come from Syria, Assad's regime is not going to give us the data to check who this person is, so you go back to square one.
And yet, let's talk about Aleppo while we're here, and then we'll get back to the vetting. In Aleppo, you've got a collapse happening in Syria. The Assad forces have retaken 2/3 of Aleppo now. You've got 20,000 people streaming out of that city and country. Where do they go? What do we do? What should be the American position here? Should we open the doors and say, come to Ohio, come to Iowa?
I've always said, as America is a Judeo-Christian nation, we are obliged to help those who we can help. But that is not a contract for national suicide. We only help those who do not pose a potential threat to the United States. Look at what Donald Trump has said. The president-elect has said we can assist by creating safe zones, buffer zones, keep those people in the region. And let me, Raymond, share with you what a Muslim chief of police told me and my wife when we visited the largest Syrian refugee camp in Jordan last Christmas. This is a Muslim, a Jordanian Sunni, who said, look, we're going to help them because they're our fellow co-religionists. But the idea that they go further west is crazy. He said, sooner or later, the best solution is the refugee has to go back to the place they came from. Why would you want to send them anywhere else? If a Jordanian Muslim chief of the police has that opinion, I think we should listen to him.
Let's talk about the vetting that goes on currently. Right now, you have to be referred by UNHCR, and then you go through the National Counterterrorism Center, then the FBI, then the Department of Defense. I mean, you really have to work your way. Department of Homeland Security. That seems like a lot of vetting. 18 months could take longer, 24 months to gain entry to the U.S. Isn't that extreme enough?
When the Obama administration tells the Department of State, which is the first place you interface as a foreigner, that those individuals looking at the refugee or the immigrant's file are not permitted to look at their public Facebook page. What kind of vetting are we doing at all? Because that somehow impinges upon the privacy rights of a foreign national. You can't make this up, Raymond. It's absurd.
Yeah, I mean,
it's absurd.
Americans' Facebook page are routinely looked at by law enforcement. They impinge our freedoms and privacy all the time. It's called law enforcement.
It is. It's called good intelligence gathering. Let me add one thing. You mentioned the Catholic charities. This is a real issue. Most people don't know this, but once an individual like a Syrian refugee has been accepted by U.S. government, their file is handed over to the charity that places them in American society. What people don't know is, once that file, that individual, is taken over by the NGO, the federal authorities are not allowed to know where they live for reasons of privacy.
What?
Yes.
So that's why they had to go to Catholic Charities
because
to get
they know the information
down on this guy.
Yeah.
Wow. And we should say, and this is, I mean, it's something we've reported here, $91 million in federal grants each year go to the Catholic Migration and Refugee Services. This is big business, and they're paid by the head. I don't mean to put too fine a point on it.
No, seriously, it has gone from charity to business, and that's not good for national security. National security is not about the bottom line and profit margins.
What should we be looking for as we, I mean, it's obviously young, males from these various countries of import and a hotbed of jihadi activity. This is where these guys are coming from. What should we look for among Americans, people who are now here, citizens? If you were advising our government and the general public, you'd say what? How do we find the next guy?
Okay, there's lots of different issues here. Number one, there's a tactical issue. If you're a Salafist jihadi, they actually practice their religion slightly differently. The posture they use when they pray, how they pray, these are special tactical issues that law enforcement has to be familiar with.
Right.
Beyond that, look at what's happened in the past. It's not rocket science. The Tsarnaev brothers, even the younger one, the doughy-eyed, innocent guy, right? He was putting on Facebook and Twitter photographs of himself underneath the ISIS flag at home and smiling. So the fact is 47% of the terrorists we have intercepted in America in the last 2.5 years linked to ISIS revealed their ideological propensities on social media long before they executed a plot or attack. It's good research, it's good police work.
Yeah. And ISIS took credit for this particular
within a
attack.
day.
Do you believe they actually orchestrated this, or is this just a kid clicking on, finding jihadi rhetoric? Now the kid is radicalized. Is this happening now, and how do we stop it? Is there a way to counter-program this?
Let me give you the data. If this man is an ISIS perpetrator, that would make the 125th ISIS terrorist intercepted in U.S. territory since the caliphate was declared 2.5 years ago. 125. What is the veracity of it? It's very interesting they accepted it so rapidly. That's unusual that it happened so quickly. Is it true? Is he an ISIS foot soldier? My response is, doesn't matter, because he is a fully paid up member of the ideological club. So whether it's Nid al-Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter, the Tsarnaev brothers, whether it's this individual, they have subscribed to and consumed the ideology of the caliphate and that the infidel must be killed. That's all you need to know. That's the connective tissue.
Why is the FBI and law enforcement still saying it's too early to say, Sebastian Gorka, that this was a terrorist act? The guy ran his car into his fellow classmates, pulled a knife on them, which he bought the day before, and started stabbing people, which is exactly what ISIS has been suggesting.
You know why? Because for 8 years, the current administration has denied the relevance of ideology. The Obama administration states terrorism is the result of root causes and upstream factors. In English, poverty and lack of education. The relevance of jihadi ideology or religion per se is absolutely negated, when of course we know if poverty and lack of education led to terrorism, half of China would be terrorists. And they're not. The missing catalyst is always an ideology.
And how do you counter-program it? What can we do in the United States to make a difference?
This is the conclusion of my book, Defeating Jihad. And I go to the Cold War and I say, how did we win the Cold War? November 9th, 1989, the people on the other side of the Berlin Wall took it down. We didn't, they did. Why? Because we had destroyed, through President Reagan, St. John Paul II, and Margaret Thatcher, the ideology of the enemy. We showed it to be a hollow, decrepit nullitude. As a result, we have to do the same thing again. We have to undermine the legitimacy, in this case, not of communist ideology, but jihadi ideology, and we must do that with our allies, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the reformists in the region. So again, it's an ideological war, less a physical one.
Last minute, with the Trump administration about to take power here in Washington, D.C., how will this change our approach to counterterrorism and for dealing with refugees and newly planted Americans who wish harm to their fellow
It will change immensely starting January 20th. If you read the President-elect's Philadelphia speech and his Jonestown speech, he is explicit. We are at war with radical Islamic counterterrorism. He calls a spade, and now that he's chosen Lieutenant General Flynn, the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, as his National Security Advisor designate, this is the man who wrote the book. He wrote The Field of Fight, and it is clear he understands this is primarily an ideological war. So everything changes. No more political correctness.
Sebastian Gorka, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We'll see you again soon. Dr. Sebastian Gorka's latest book, Defeating Jihad, The Winnable War, is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. You can also follow Dr. Gorka on his website, thegorkabriefing.com. My next guest has been topping the New York Times bestseller list for children since 2007, when his Diary of a Wimpy Kid series made its debut. Since then, his Wimpy Kid stories have won praise from parents and teachers alike for getting those reluctant readers to devour books. The 11th and latest installment of The Wimpy Kid, called Double Down, is out now. I sat down with Jeff Kinney to discuss his work, the power of great storytelling, and the faith of his Wimpy Kid. Here's my exclusive interview with Jeff Kinney. Okay. Jeff, you grew up in Fort Washington, Maryland, right? Very near here. Your father worked at the Pentagon?
I did indeed, yes.
How did all of that shape what would become your life's work, Diary of a Wimpy Kid?
I had a really ordinary childhood, and I think that that was really good for me because ordinary things happen. I didn't have anything extraordinary happen to me. But I think that I had a normal childhood, and that was really good fodder for the type of writing I do. Realistic fiction, writing about situations everyone can relate to.
Now, you started cartooning when? I know in your college newspaper you created a character called Igdoof?
Igdoof, that's how you pronounce it.
Who is
yeah,
Igdoof?
Good job. Igdoof was an awkward freshman. He was a strange-looking character, and he's the character that I wanted to take forward. I wanted to become a syndicated newspaper cartoonist, but I tried it for about 3 years, couldn't break in, and had to find a different way in.
Who were your inspirations?
I think that the cartoonists that most inspired me were Carl Barks, who did the Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge comics from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s.
Beautiful stuff, yeah.
And then Gary Larson, I would say, is a big influence, and maybe even Matt Groening, some of his early books.
Yeah. No, Gary Larson, I see some of that cracked sensibility around the edges in Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Cartoon, I have to tell you, comic strips, cartoons rarely make me laugh. Your stuff is actually, I mean, I hear my children belly laughing, and or I'll read it to them, and you know, we're laughing along. They do have that sort of, you take the ordinary and you sort of turn it on its ear. How aware are you of that? Do you do that in your life?
Well, when I wrote these books, I wrote them for adults. I was really trying to write an opus, sort of a nostalgia piece on childhood. So something along the lines of the comic equivalent of A Christmas Story or The Wonder Years, where it's an adult looking back on a child's life. And so I always had the adult reader in mind, and so I knew I could be arch, and I could have a lot of irony in my books, but then it got turned into a children's series.
Did that change the way you wrote the series from that point on?
It didn't change the way I wrote the series, but it caused me to worry. It caused me to worry that kids wouldn't get the joke, that they wouldn't be in on the joke. And I've found that kids are in on the joke.
Big time.
After they get to a certain age. My then 7-year-old read some of my books and didn't get them. He couldn't figure out why they were supposed to be funny. And then when he turned 8, you know, he read the same stuff, and I quizzed him. I said, "Do you get this? Why is this funny?" And he could explain it to me, but he got really frustrated when he couldn't.
Now, you started writing this series, I mean, doing the Diary of a Wimpy Kid in 1998. But then in May of 2004, you post them online.
That's right.
And they were installments, right?
Right.
So why did you do that?
I started posting them online because our website, the website that we worked for at the time, Funbrain, had a big audience, and there was a need to get people to be reading in the summertime. And so I thought it was a great opportunity for me to start putting together what I had written and start posting it. It just predated blogs.
Yep.
So that was kind of a novel idea at the time, which was posting something new every day and having an eager audience.
What was the genesis of Greg Heffley? And is there any connection between Greg Heffley and Jeff Kinney?
Well, I think you can hear it right in the names. If you put one name on top of the other, right, the meter is there. And that's about as close as Greg gets to me, is that the meter is there, but the specifics aren't. Really? Greg is really an exaggerated version of myself. He's very flawed. He's got my flaws, but they're a little bit amplified. And in some cases, my flaws are deeper than Greg's.
Tell me about Pop Tropica.
Pop Tropico.
Where did that come from?
Well, you said it with an accent.
I know.
like
I'm giving it a little. I'm giving it a little Latin flair.
Right?
Yeah.
Pop Tropico is an idea I had when I was mowing my lawn. This idea that you would go on a virtual world, into a virtual world, and go on different islands and have different experiences and quests. Something really unique and unusual, and it's gotten a huge audience, hundreds and hundreds of millions of kids.
No, it's an enormous. I mean, and of course, but there's a tie-in between Greg and the Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I mean, he's got his own world and multiple islands. Yes.
That's right. Yeah, you've done your homework.
Well, I don't do my homework. I look over the shoulders of some of your 100 million fans who are going on the site. What do you offer there? Why has that clicked, do you think?
Well, Pop Tropico really is a direct descendant of the Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck books that I read as a kid, where Carl Barks, this cartoonist, introduced me to my world. My whole basis of understanding of the world started with those comics. Religion, psychology, psychiatry, geology, history, everything came from those comics to start with. And I knew that we had this privilege, the privilege and the responsibility to communicate a kid's world back to them. And they were reading about, they were experiencing things like Greek mythology for the first time.
Right.
We had the chance to do that. So that's why it's been very edifying and rewarding.
No, it's a lot of fun for kids. Tell me about, you say you didn't start out to help kids or teach kids to read, you sought out to entertain them.
Yeah, and I still have that as my charge. I'm not trying to moralize to kids. I don't want my books to be amoral, but usually when an adult is writing for kids, they think, well, if I'm writing for kids, I must impart some sort of lesson that's a very grown-up sort of lesson, because that's your charge.
Right.
And for me, I think my charge is to put humor as a priority. And if you moralize to kids, especially writing for this age group, they can sniff it out, and they will, and then they'll be turned off to it.
So run away from you.
Yeah, I like the message that reading is fun. That's a good enough message for me.
That's enough for you. How do you start? When you start a new book, where do you begin? Do you isolate a moment in your life or in the lives of your children? Where does the germ originate?
I start with jokes. I know from experience I need 350 jokes to create one book. So I spend a lot of time just walking and experiencing life in different ways to try to get my brain working. I know the ideas are in there. I just have to figure out how to get them out. And this year I had a really unique experience. I knew I needed to get away to write, and I didn't know where I was going to go. So I literally went to the airport packed for a warmer climate. It was in the middle of the winter. And so I was packed for Florida. I live in Massachusetts. And then I changed my mind at the last second. I got the last ticket to Iceland. And so I showed up in Iceland without a winter coat, with shorts and flip-flops. And I did my best writing there.
Really?
And I think I have to trick my brain that way. If my brain is comfortable, my brain is sort of like a kid with oppositional defiance disorder.
Yeah, it only works if it's got something that contradicts it.
Yes, exactly. So I have to sort of trick myself.
And how long were you in Iceland?
I was in Iceland for 5 days, and it was the best writing I did this year.
And you wrote the whole book? You didn't write the whole book then,
no,
but you kind of framed it up.
Yeah, I generated probably 70 out of the 350 ideas, which is significant.
Wow. Now, this is a book, we should say. It pioneered, I would say, the hybrid of comics as well as text. And it creates a very non-threatening, when a child sees a page like this, they're not threatened by it. And they, in fact, and then they're hooked, and you see them. They just start flipping. My children burn through these in a day or less, which, I'm sure you hear this everywhere you go. And everywhere I travel as a children's author, somebody's got a copy of Diary of a Wimpy Kid or two on them, or they're trading them like baseball cards.
Right.
That's got to make you feel good.
It does. It's a huge surprise to me. But I think what makes these books work, you hit it on the head, is that when a kid opens a book, they see that it doesn't look like work. Maybe it's fun. And that those drawings that they give the kid these little islands to swim to. You have the text, which is the work, and then you get the reward. And I think that's very effective. It's a good way to motivate kids to read.
But you stumbled into it. That wasn't the initial idea.
It definitely wasn't. That's been a discovery after the fact.
Now, these books have been translated into Latin and hundreds of other languages, but Latin.
Yeah.
Presented to the Pope.
Yes.
As a Catholic, that's got to make you feel pretty good.
It was pretty cool. You know, my Italian publisher was really excited when they came up with this idea of translating the book into Latin, and I was like, it sounds fun, you know, I'm not sure who will read it.
Yeah.
And then one day they sent me a picture of the book being handed to the Pope, the first copy.
Wow.
So that really was cool, yeah.
Is any of your faith in the books? Do you weave your faith in? Does it color the edges of the book or the character?
I think that Greg's family, I would say that they're Catholic. I try to keep it generic in a way, so that it's accessible to everyone. But I would say, yeah, the family is a church-going family, and I'm really trying to reflect my own experience, and that was my experience then, and it is now.
You have a bookstore now.
Yes.
Which I want to talk about in a moment, but on the third floor of that bookstore is a studio.
That's right.
How often do you work there every day?
I work there every day from about January until May, and then I go into seclusion all the way until December, and then I'll return back to the bookstore.
Now, I want you to back up. What do you do when you're there on the third floor? Are you working on your books there, or are you working the bookstore?
I answer emails and work with my bookstore staff and my own smaller staff there, but when I need to write and really write, I need to be by myself.
You're secluded?
Yes.
And where do you go for that?
I have a very strange situation. We have a normal size house, sort of a modest size house, and next to it is a slightly smaller house. I work there, and it's a studio space. You know, I've had my 2 employees work there, and then we have guests stay there. So it's really well used.
Wow.
But the really strange thing is that we had the house next to that, a neighbor's house, last summer was hit by a small plane.
Oh my gosh.
In our neighborhood, and so the people who lived inside of that house were all safe, and they moved out into my studio house. So I lost the studio house for about a year, and I've just gotten it back now.
Now it's back. But that's where you do the writing, the majority of the writing and the sketching for these
Yes,
books.
that's correct.
Wow. 180 million copies in print, 50 languages. Did you ever think this series would do what it's done and reach the people, the children it has?
You know, I never thought that I'd get the book published, on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, Greg starts off this book saying, you know, one day when I'm rich and famous, you know, I won't have to answer these stupid questions. And I think that there is that very American feeling, well, one day when I'm president, you know. And so what I found when I go out into the world is that other publisher or media types, interviewers say, now why would Greg say one day when I'm rich and famous? And I've really realized that is a very American kind of attitude, and that's surprised me. I thought every kid thought, well, one day I'll be the leader, you know.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think they all do. You have special insight to kids too. I think you're on their wavelength, because there are things here that frankly a lot of adults have lost touch with, that
right.
You are obviously very clued into. And I see the reaction among children. They recognize it. What do you see when you look at these books? When you see them on the shelf and you see kids reading them, and what are they seeing?
That's a good question. What I see is a book that I might have liked to have encountered, because it's going to give me perspective on my own life. It might have helped me through some bad situations, and it might have taught me to laugh at myself. And I think humor is tragedy plus time, and these embarrassing things and these awful things happen to all of us, but I've packaged it in a way that I think is accessible for kids.
So it takes you about half a year to write one of these books.
That's right.
Do you ever get the feeling, here's the Conan Doyle question, is there any moment where you say, you know what, I'm going to push Greg off of Reichenbach Falls. I'm not doing another. This is it. He's going to go off to college, and I'm closing the door.
Yeah, I've thought about that, but I have come to the conclusion. In fact, this book is called Double Down, because that's my state of mind. What I've realized is that Greg is rooted more in comics than he is in literature. And cartoon characters have an undetermined lifespan.
Right.
You know, Charles Schultz's creations lasted for 50 years.
Right.
And sometimes cartoons die too soon. Calvin and Hobbes did. The Far Side did. And when a comic goes away, it leaves a hole in people's lives. So I think you can't take that decision too lightly.
I want to ask you some questions I ask every author that comes in the Story-Entered segment. What is your favorite children's book?
My favorite children's book, I'm going to go with Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing by Judy Blume.
Oh, sure.
Peter Hatcher is this really relatable character, and something awful happens with the turtle.
What's your least favorite book?
My least favorite book. I would say my least favorite book is anything that has a heavy-handed message.
The story or the book that touched Jeff Kinney's life in a way that changed it.
That would be,
Reoriented.
I would say the book, there's a book called Inside the Box, and it's about innovation. It's a grown-up book, and it teaches you techniques for innovating, and it's really shined a light on how Diary of a Wimpy Kid, why Diary of a Wimpy Kid worked for me, and it's helped me make decisions going forward.
And why does it work for you?
Well, one of the key tools is called subtraction, and it's the idea of taking a product, taking a thing, and then subtracting what seems to be the most important or nearly the most important element and seeing what you have left. And for me, that was taking this dream of becoming a newspaper cartoonist and subtracting the newspaper. And I became a cartoonist because I was able to subtract the newspaper from the vision.
Wow. And you infected a whole generation or two now with your vision. That was, you didn't need the newspaper.
Right.
Where do your best ideas come from? And where do you go looking for them?
My best ideas come from real life. If something's rooted in reality, then it's going to be much better than something that comes from my imagination.
If you could pick a mentor, dead or alive, a writing mentor,
Yeah.
who would it be?
Well, the person that I fully don't understand but recognize as a genius is Bob Dylan. I really enjoy his work. I think he is fully deserving of the
Nobel laureate?
I do, yeah. I really do. I think he's
You
a
do?
genius. But I truly don't understand what makes him work.
Yeah, well, because he just follows his own, it seems he just follows his own gut no
Yeah.
matter where he goes. And it's just such a startling vision. Everybody gets caught up in it.
Yes.
Not unlike a wimpy kid.
Quite
Advice-
unlike it.
Well, look, you may get the Nobel Prize yet. You've
Yeah,
got time.
let's see.
Look, they never thought lyrics would. What about cartoons?
Right.
What advice would you give to parents who are desperately trying to get the kids to read, and they won't do it?
Yeah. Well, I'm a bookseller now, and I would
Yes.
hand them one of my books, or I'd hand them a similar book. I think it's too big of a jump to go from picture books to chapter books with no illustrations. I think there needs to be something in between that gets kids motivated. And when a kid finishes a book, it's a feeling of success. They have a feeling of success. It's very addictive.
Yeah, and that's what the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books really give them. That they get that sense of confidence, the speed. My children first read your books and then found their way to chapter books and other things that were much more dense and complicated. But you're right, it was not the content, but the experience that gave them that. But you know what? They keep coming back.
That's
though.
good.
That's what I find.
It's bathroom reading.
Well, people want to laugh, and children especially want to laugh.
Yeah.
Life is so heavy on them. I really do think they need that. They need to be reminded life can be funny.
I agree.
And I love that you have a family, an intact family also, that sort of goes on the journey with this boy, which was a big inspiration, I have to tell you, in my own writing. But we'll talk
great.
about that another time. Are you an architect or a gardener? George Martin said there are two approaches to writers. They're either architects or gardeners.
I'm an architect, but I'm terrible at maintenance. I need to build and move on.
So you keep moving.
Yes.
What's next for Greg?
Book 12, I have an idea already. It's going to be a holiday movie, and we're working on a new movie based on The Long Haul right now. Wow. Also a musical and an animated TV special, so lots.
Wow, incredible. Jeff Kinney, thank you. Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Double Down, the 11th and latest in the series by Jeff Kinney, is available at bookstores everywhere and online. And we have some great resources for you if you're interested in literacy or getting your kids to read at Storyented.com. Well, that's all the time we have until next week. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter. I always update you with the latest news 24/7. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. You can also sign up for my free e-blast there. Join us next week for a special panel discussion of the Pope's controversial Amoris Laetitia and its teaching on divorced and remarried Catholics and communion, featuring Robert Royal and Archbishop Joseph Kurtz. Plus, a real-life exorcist tells us why his services are more in need than ever. And Mark Schreiber will discuss his search for the real Pope Francis. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.
News.